Okay, if you were into Billy Squier back in the early 80s, I think you'll really enjoy this video. What I found is in 1981, I found this article where they do an interview with Billy Squier. Now, this is on the album, or after he'd released the album, Don't Say No, and I have my copy of Don't Say No right here. This, in my humble opinion, is one of the best albums that came out of the 1980s. I love every single song on this album. I think it was just spectacular what he did here. And for Billy Squier, this was, in my opinion, this is when he hit his peak. This was just absolutely incredible. I mean, the track list on this thing, In the Dark was amazing. The Stroke was amazing. My Kind of Lover, you still hear that around. And actually, you still hear The Stroke around. You Know What I Like was great. 2 Days Gone was the only one where it was kind of like, not spectacular, but still pretty good. Lonely as a Night, amazing. What Do You Want? What do you want from me? Oh my gosh, it was great. Nobody Knows kind of slowed down, which it was still cool. I Need You, Don't Say No. I mean, the whole album is so good. Anyway, so this came out in 1981, and the thing is, he was a veteran musician at this point. He'd been around for a while, but just not a lot of people knew who he was. He'd been in some bands prior to this, most notably one a lot of people know about is Piper. They'd had, I don't know, couple of albums, maybe 2 or 3. I don't own any of them, but I've heard some of that music, and it was kind of more poppy. And then Tale of the Tape came out, which was right before this, and it was okay. And then this one, though, it was just spectacular. And so I found this article that was an interview with him, and he talks just gives a little insight into him getting to this point, what his thought process was. And it's not very long, but if you liked Billy Squier, I think you'll enjoy listening to this little interview that was done. And so what it is it's from the Wichita Eagle, October 30th, 1981. It's on page 58. And you can see a picture of Billy Squier over there on the left, and it says, Billy Squier is enjoying new status. Becoming a top 10 artist surprised me. That's his quote there. So it says, heavy rock paid off for Squier. Singer-guitarist Don't Say No album hits platinum. Okay. So, and this was actually, as you can see there, if you're looking at it on the screen, this was originally printed in Rolling Stone. New York. It caught even Billy Squier off guard. After 3 bands, 4 albums, and 13 years in the business, the singer-guitarist has struck platinum pay dirt with his latest LP, Don't Say No, and with the top 10 single, The Stroke. I remember, again, a lot of these things that I talk about, either came out before I was paying attention to the pop culture and music, or just right as I was starting to. And this was the former. I was, I think, 11 when this came out. And so I really wasn't paying a lot of attention. But then by the time I really started getting into Billy Squier a year or two later, I started listening to this. But I do remember The Stroke coming out and hearing that on the radio, because it was so popular. Do you remember when that came out? Be curious to hear that, because it was such a huge song. Becoming a top 10 artist has surprised me, says the 31-year-old Squier in his Midtown Manhattan hotel room. But at the risk of sounding egotistical, I think the record deserves it. Don't Say No is one of the premier hard rock albums of the season. The tunes are sinewy and upbeat. The playing is crisp and taut, and particularly his songwriting. Squier's managed to incorporate a deft pop sensibility into a genre not noted for subtlety. It's a strategy that's been a long time in the making. And then here's a quote from Billy Squier. I always wanted to merge heavy metal with pop music, but I think that because I grew up more with pop, the Beatles and the Stones, I tended to affiliate myself with those projects, says Squier. At the time, I was nurturing this love of heavy guitar music, cacophonous drums, that sort of thing. And it's right, when you listen to Piper, it's very kind of more poppy than the stuff he does as a solo artist. Quote, so I've progressed to where I'm much heavier than I used to be, though I don't think it's heavy metal. Call it heavy rock with pop overtones. The bottom line is that I'm much happier being heavier. Squier, who grew up in the well-to-do Boston suburb of Wellesley Hills, comes from a varied musical background. His first band, Magic Terry and the Universe, was born out of the psychedelic haze of the late 60s. The members migrated to New York City, where they fell in with Andy Warhol's crowd, and often the teenage Squier would rub elbows with Jimi Hendrix or Jeff Beck, which is pretty darn cool. And actually, by the way, if you didn't know this, Andy Warhol, he says that he migrated, fell in with the Andy Warhol's crowd. He actually became friends with Andy Warhol, and the next album that he put out, Emotions in Motion, the cover of the album was actually a piece of Andy Warhol's artwork. And what it is it's Billy Squier's face done in that Andy Warhol style that we know, reminiscent of the tomato can. It's kind of that same type of flavor. And Billy Squier loved it so much, he put it on the cover of his album, Emotions in Motion, his next album. Okay, so in his words, he overamped on the whole experience and returned to Boston, where he studied at the Berklee School of Music. In 1971, he was asked to join the Sidewinders, a fabled proto-new wave outfit whose self-titled 1972 album, produced by Lenny Kaye, is now a collector's item. In the mid-70s, Squier fronted Piper. I think we mentioned that one a minute ago. A five-man band whose pleasant Beatlesque harmonies and triple guitar textures earned some marginal national exposure. But after 2 albums, he felt he had to go solo. Quote, "Following the example of Bruce Springsteen or Bob Seger," he says, "I wanted to have a band, a sound, and a personality, yet maintain a singular position of being able to control and motivate the flow of things," unquote. On his first solo album, 1980's The Tale of the Tape, Squier made inroads into hard-rocking territory. But with the recording of Don't Say No earlier this year, all the pieces seemed to fall into place. He credits his teaming up with the German producer Mack. Now, when he says Mack, we're talking about Reinhold Mack. And where you would know Reinhold Mack is he actually produced a lot of groups. So the thing that you would know is Queen's The Game. That's the album that has Another One Bites the Dust. Anyway, so he worked with Billy Squier in producing this album, Don't Say No. As a matter of fact, if you look on the back of the album, it says produced by Mack and Billy. So Reinhold Mack, Billy Squier. Anyway, he's the one that really helped Queen. Let's see here. Who has worked with Queen among others as a major step? And he had a personal breakthrough in a marathon burst of creativity. He wrote the record's 10 songs in just 1 month. That's pretty amazing because he had so many just amazing tunes on here, and he did it in a month. Squier has spent most of 1981 opening shows for such multi-platinum acts as Journey, REO Speedwagon, and Pat Benatar. He's now on a U.S. tour with Foreigner that he enthuses is a dream bill. He's also been busy cutting a single for the Yule season, Christmas is the Time to Say I Love You, and headlining a couple of sold-out shows in Boston this past August that were like a homecoming. Quote, "People kept coming up to me and saying, 'We're so proud of you.' And I'd say, I'm glad you're so pleased." Quote, "I realized that everyone there was having more fun than I was. Even now, I wish I weren't working so hard so I could sit back and enjoy it," unquote. Not that he's complaining, mind you. Quote, "I'm the only person I know who's never had a regular job," he said. "I've always felt that this was the only thing I wanted to do, and I didn't want to waste time doing anything else. Maybe that's how I should look at it. I have great job security. I've had the same gig for 13 years. Yeah, and then, of course, and that's the end of the article. And then, of course, this album was huge. Then he put out that next album, Emotions in Motion, which basically had 2 hits that came off of it, the song Emotions in Motion and a song called Everybody Wants You. Anyway, and I actually saw him on that tour, and believe it or not, he was headlining a big arena, and the opening band, believe it or not, was Def Leppard. They were on their Pyromania tour at the time. Be curious if anybody else saw that tour and what you thought of it, because in my opinion, even though it seems like so many people that went to that concert went to see Def Leppard because they were just exploding at the time, even in my undiscerning 13-year-old, however old I was at the time, it still seemed that Billy Squier was a better stage presence. he's a really, really solid performer. He knows how to be on stage and kind of command the setting. Where I've seen Def Leppard in concert a bunch of times. I've never thought they were great in concert, but anyway, Billy Squier, I thought he was just fantastic. Interestingly, though, Emotions in Motion, I thought was a step down from this one, and then I kept buying his albums 3 or 4 after that, and then I just kind of, I don't know, I just don't think any of them ever really lived up to this. This was just so spectacular. And if you remember this album, if you liked this album, if you have any feedback, what your favorite track was, if you saw him on this tour, I would love to hear about it. If he was on this, when he was the opening act for some of these people, I'd love to hear your feedback on that. So anyway, of course, follow the channel, please. Like the video, and any feedback you have, thoughts, feelings, experiences you had with this stuff, I'd love to hear it. And anyway, with that, have yourself a fantastic day.